So if you've ever been in a toxic relationship, you already know how painful it is. But what you may not realize is there are some very important life lessons that toxic relationships can teach you. So in this video, we're going to go over what those important life lessons are so that you can do more healing. But if you're new, my name's Michelle Ferris. I'm a psychotherapist and I love helping people create relationships that work. And you can also find this video on my YouTube podcast playlist. So you may be asking yourself, what could a toxic relationship teach me? Toxic relationships are your greatest teachers because there's a lot to unpack and learn from, and that's what we're going to do today. Now, if you're struggling with codependency, you have a huge heart and you may have trouble recognizing a toxic relationship because you're such an incredible giver. But I don't want you to stay in that toxic relationship. And these life lessons are going to help you get out of it faster. So let's get started. So every toxic relationship teaches you one very important thing. It teaches you how to trust yourself again. Because in toxic relationships, you're going to have a lot of experiences that don't feel good to you. And we want to use that to validate that we are actually learning how to trust ourselves in those relationships so that we can create better ones down the road. So the first life lesson you're learning is that in a toxic relationship, they only reach out when they need something. The relationship centers around what they need, not what you need. And you start to realize that, wow, you know what? My needs don't matter. And eventually that feeling of being invisible and taken advantage of because the relationship is so one-sided gets to a point where you can't ignore it anymore. And that is your self-trust building. Knowing that every time you have that experience where it has to be about them, not you, your heart sinks. You feel resentful and angry. All of those are really healthy signs for you because it tells you that this isn't okay. And eventually you're going to need to leave that toxic relationship because it's not helping you in any way. So another really powerful life lesson in toxic relationships is that when you set a boundary, they get angry and they may even blame you for it. They can't handle you saying no or having a difference of opinion. And they even make you feel bad or wrong for it. This is where the gaslighting comes in, where you ask for something and they make you feel bad and even question why you even asked. Because toxic people don't respect boundaries. But here's the life lesson. You get an upfront view of who really cares about you and who doesn't. Because the people who don't honor your boundaries don't really care about your well-being. But the ones who do are the ones we want to spend our time and energy building those relationships because those are worth having. Another really important life lesson when it comes to toxic relationships is that when you reach out for support, they disappear. Or maybe there's a conflict and you need to talk to them about a concern about something they said. They're nowhere to be found because toxic people don't do conflict typically. The only way they do conflict is to blame you and make you responsible for their feelings. And that's not healthy. Trying to be in a healthy relationship with someone who is toxic is impossible. And I don't want that for you. What I want you to do is see the lesson in that is, again, their toxic behavior is more about them and their inability to be healthy than who you are. Because often the toxic person is really good at blaming you and making you take responsibility for the friendship or the relationship not working. And that's just not true. Another really valuable lesson in a toxic relationship is you realize you're doing all the work. You're doing the contacting, you're doing the giving, and they're not giving much, if anything, back. You're going to start to feel resentful and angry, and that's okay because those feelings are your red flags to tell you to trust yourself, that this relationship is not benefiting you in any way. Let's face it, when we're in relationships, we don't usually take action right away. It takes a while. And sometimes we need all of these lessons in our toxic relationship before we finally get to the point of saying enough is enough. I can't be in this relationship anymore because that's where we want to eventually get to. And that's why listening to those feelings you're having and those reactions confirming that something isn't okay with you. In fact, it's hurting you. That is such a huge life lesson here to build self-trust because in a way, that's going to help you create healthier relationships in the long run. Another really important life lesson is when you realize you don't feel safe to share anything with them. That's huge because already that self-trust is being built because you know it isn't safe to share certain vulnerable information with them. And that's when you know you're well on your way to trusting yourself more fully because you're already protecting yourself intuitively. And that is a really good sign because that means you're practicing detachment, which is a very healthy skill with toxic relationships. So why are these lessons so valuable? Pain becomes our teacher, right? We don't do things the first time out. The first red flag we have in relationships doesn't usually get our attention, but the 10th one might, the 20th might, and that's human behavior. Part of this process of growth is messy. And if you're in a toxic relationship, it does take a while to recognize that. And that's why I'm sharing these lessons with you, because I want you to see that your reactions and your feelings are absolutely valid. And they're going to help you eventually end that toxic relationship. Because each time you do this work, you're going to start recognizing the red flags faster. You're going to start speaking up sooner. You're going to start choosing detachment instead of drama. And you're going to trust yourself over that toxic person. And this is key because the lesson isn't about changing them. It's about changing you and developing that self-trust inside of you so that you get to a place where you can choose out of that toxic relationship. So I also have a self-trust journal that you can get if you want to do a deep dive, because I can't tell you enough how important it is to validate yourself and to trust your own thoughts and feelings when it comes to relationships rather than someone else's, because that's how you take your power back. So how do you begin to start developing self-trust? Well, the first thing is to honor what you feel, no matter what it looks like. Because when something feels off, and it often does in toxic relationships, I want you to pause and really do some writing or validate to yourself that this actually is your experience. No matter what the toxic person is telling you, you're absolutely 100% right on what you feel about the situation, because that's how we start to practice self-love. Another way to start developing self-trust in toxic relationships is practicing detachment. Don't be as available to them. Walk away when they start yelling or mistreating you in any way. Don't participate in those heated conversations that go nowhere, because there's no value in that for you or for them. You don't want to give them an audience because you don't want to feed that toxic behavior. The next thing I want you to do when you're developing self-trust is I don't want you to beat yourself up. I want you to look at those mistakes and those red flags as warning signs that we all get. There's usually a process of awareness that has to build over time before we're willing to really trust ourselves, and that's okay. Because most of us, if we get into toxic relationships, we probably have some experience with toxic family members in our childhood that make it really difficult to leave these kind of relationships because they remind us of who we grew up with, and that also is part of the process of growth. So just remember, toxic relationships are not a life sentence. They're not relationships you have to stay in forever. They're opportunities for you to learn, to recognize what's not working and what doesn't feel good to you, and to use that self-trust of your experience to get out, because that's your next step. I want you to go watch my video on how to detach from toxic people, because that is your next step. Thanks so much.